The wind didn't just howl across the Montana plains, it screamed. It was a living thing, a predator made of ice and fury, rattling the loose boards of every homestead and slamming barn doors, with a violence that promised worse to come. The sky was the color of a fresh bruise, heavy and dark, threatening to swallow the last of the afternoon light whole. Owen McDry felt it in his bones. He pulled his duster tighter, the worn fabric a poor shield against the coming cold. His horse, a steady old gelding named Patches, picked its way down a trail that was more mud than dirt. Every step was a squelching protest. Behind him, the storm clouds gathered like an army, and he could smell the iron and ice on the air. He knew with the certainty of a man who'd lived his life outdoors that he didn't have much time. Then he saw it. From the crest of a low ridge, the Lundy Ranch came into view. And something was wrong. It wasn't just weather-beaten, it was broken. The fences leaned like weary old men, their spines snapped, with gaps wide enough for a whole herd to wander through. The pasture was grazed down to nothing but roots and stones, a brown scar on the land. And the barn. The barn was the reason he was here. It sagged to one side, its roofline crooked, looking like one more hard push from the wind would send it collapsing into a pile of splinters. Owen pulled his horse to a stop, a deep frown creasing his brow. He'd seen his share of failing farms, places worn down by drought or debt. But this felt different. This felt like a place that had given up the ghost. There was no movement, no dog barking a welcome or a warning, no smoke curling from the chimney, even as the temperature plummeted. The silence was the most unnerving part. It was a dead, heavy silence that prickled the hairs on the back of his neck. For a moment, he wondered if he was too late. If the woman who'd sent a desperate letter to the general store in town, the letter that had found its way to him, had already packed up and left. Then a sharp crack echoed across the yard. Instinct took over. Owen's hand shot to the handle of the hatchet tied to his saddle, his eyes scanning the property, narrowing into slits. He saw it. A loose shutter on the main house, caught by a gust, slamming itself against the wall over and over again. He let out a slow breath, shaking his head at his own jumpiness. But the feeling of unease lingered, thick and cloying. He urged Patches forward, into the yard. The horse's hooves made a sick, sucking sound in the mud. As he dismounted, his boots sank into a deep patch of muck, nearly sending him sprawling. He muttered a curse under his breath. "Great start, McDree," he told himself, wrestling his foot free. "You're McDree?" The voice was sharp, cutting through the wind like a shard of glass. Owen spun around. A woman stood in the doorway of the house. She had an apron tied at her waist, its faded blue cloth stained with flour, and her sleeves were rolled past her elbows, showing strong, capable forearms. Her chestnut hair was pinned into a tight bun, but the wind had pulled loose a few defiant strands, whipping them across a face that was far too young to look so tired. She couldn't have been older than her mid-20s, but her eyes were dark and steady, holding the weight of someone who'd seen and carried far too much. "Yes, ma'am," Owen said, remembering his manners and tipping the brim of his hat. "Owen McDry, you must be Mrs. Lundy." She stepped down from the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. Her movements were precise, economical, no wasted energy. "Cora Lundy, you made good time. I wasn't expecting you until tomorrow." "Storm's coming," he replied, his gaze drifting back to the crippled barn. "Figured if I'm fixing a roof, better get to it before the snow decides to help it fall down the rest of the way. That the one?" Cora followed his gaze. The barn sagged, a wounded giant. "Yes, a section of the roof gave way after the last big windstorm. I did what I could, but—" Her voice trailed off, but Owen understood. You can only patch so many holes when the world keeps throwing rocks. "Mind if I take a closer look?" he asked, removing his hat and running a hand through his dark, damp hair. She nodded, but he saw it. A flicker of hesitation in her eyes. A guardedness that was as solid as a locked door. This wasn't just about a broken barn. He could feel it. She was sizing him up, testing him, measuring whether he was the kind of man who could be trusted on her land, or the kind of man who would bring more trouble. He walked toward the barn, the sense of wrongness growing with every step. The main doors hung crooked on their hinges. He pushed one open with a groan of protesting metal and stepped inside. The air was thick with the smell of wet hay, mildew, and something else, something sharp and out of place, freshly cut wood. He frowned. Why would a barn that was falling apart smell like new lumber? His eyes adjusted to the gloom. Light streamed in through a massive hole in the roof, illuminating a scene of devastation. A huge section of the main support beam had splintered, dragging half the roof down with it. Splintered was the wrong word. He crouched down, running a calloused hand along the break. It wasn't a splinter. It was a clean, straight cut, as if someone had sawn it 3/4 of the way through and let the wind do the rest. This barn hadn't just collapsed. It had been helped. He stood up slowly, his mind racing. Who would do this, and why? He turned, looking back at the house, at the solitary woman standing on the porch. The wind whipped her dress around her, making her look small and fragile against the vast, unforgiving landscape. But Owen knew better. Fragile women didn't survive out here alone. They had to be made of something tougher, something like steel. The question was that steel meant to protect her? Or was it hiding something else entirely? He looked back at the sawn beam, then at the house. This wasn't a simple repair job anymore. He had just walked into the middle of a story, and he had a sinking feeling he wasn't going to like how it ended. Cora was watching him from the porch, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. He walked back out into the biting wind, his face a grim mask. "It's bad," he said, stopping a few feet from her. "Worse than you think." "I know it's bad, Mr. McDry," she said, her voice laced with impatience. "That's why I hired you. How long will it take to fix?" He held her gaze. "That depends. You gonna tell me who tried to bring your barn down on purpose?" Her face went pale. The guardedness in her eyes sharpened into fear, then anger. "What are you talking about? It was the storm." "Storms don't use saws, Mrs. Lundy," he said quietly. "That main beam was cut. Deliberately. Someone wanted this barn to fall. Now you can keep pretending you don't know what I'm talking about, and I can patch your roof and be on my way. Or you can tell me the truth, and maybe I can actually help you." She stared at him, her jaw tight, her mind clearly at war with itself. The wind howled around them, as if trying to tear the secrets from the very air. He could see the struggle in her eyes, the desperate calculation. Trusting him was a risk, but not trusting him might be a bigger one. Finally, she let out a shaky breath. "My husband, Thomas, he didn't die in an accident." Owen waited, his expression unchanging. He knew this was the real beginning. "He was murdered," she whispered, the words nearly stolen by the wind. "And whoever killed him is trying to scare me off this land. They think a collapsed barn will be the final push I need to run." Her eyes locked onto his, and they were filled with a terrifying combination of grief and defiance. "They're wrong." Owen looked from her determined face to the sabotaged barn, then to the darkening, violent sky. He had come here for a simple job, a few days' work for a few dollars, but that job was gone. In its place was something far more dangerous. He was standing on a battleground, and the first shot had already been fired. "You'll need a new beam," he said, his voice practical, cutting through the emotion of the moment. "And a lot of solid planks. I can patch it for now to get you through the storm, but to make it hold through the winter, we'll need proper lumber." Her jaw tightened. "How long?" 2 days, maybe 3. Depends on what I'm working with. I've got a few planks left from when my husband built the calf pen," she said, her voice catching on the word husband. "But not enough. You'll have to go into town for the rest." Something in her tone, a deep, resonant grief, made him pause. This wasn't just a business transaction anymore. He had crossed a line the moment he saw that sawed beam. "All right," he said. "I'll see what I can do with what you've got today." He gestured toward the leaning fences, the general state of disrepair. "But you should know, this place needs more than a new roof. You running all this alone?" She looked at him then, sharp and unflinching, the grief replaced by steel. "Long enough to know what I'm doing, Mr. McDry. I asked you to fix a roof, not to give an opinion on my life." There it was, the part of her that refused to break. Owen gave a small nod of respect. He liked that. "Yes, ma'am." He spent the next few hours working with a focused intensity, tearing out the broken, splintered boards and hammering the few good planks she had into place. It was a temporary fix, a bandage on a gaping wound, but it might just hold. Every so often, he'd catch sight of her in the distance, her small figure moving with quiet purpose as she tended to the livestock. She was a woman carrying the weight of a world on her shoulders, and doing it in a silence that was more than just emptiness. It was defiance. By late afternoon, the sky turned a sinister shade of gray. The temperature dropped sharply, and the first fat, wet snowflakes began to drift down. Owen paused, wiping a mixture of sweat and grime from his brow with the back of his glove. He looked toward the house. Cora appeared on the porch, her arms folded against the cold. "You'll never make it back to town in this," she called out, her voice thin against the rising wind. "Guess I'll be sleeping in the barn," he shouted back. She studied him for a long moment, the snow swirling around her. He couldn't read her expression from this distance. Then she made a decision. "There's stew on the stove. Come eat before you settle in for the night." He almost refused. Habit made him wary of accepting hospitality, of stepping into anyone's home, anyone's life. It was safer to stay on the outside. But her voice didn't hold pity. It was a simple statement of fact, an offer that felt more like a challenge. And Owen McDry had never been one to back down from a challenge. "All right," he said, gathering his tools as the wind began to bite. The full force of the storm hit just as he stepped onto the porch. The windows of the old house rattled in their frames, and outside, the world disappeared into a blinding curtain of swirling white. As Cora ladled thick, hearty stew into 2 bowls, Owen felt the bone-deep weariness of the day settle into his muscles. He watched her, this woman holding a crumbling world together with sheer force of will, and for the first time in a long, long time, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, he'd stumbled upon a place worth fighting for. But as he looked at the fear still lingering behind her eyes, he knew the fight had already begun. And the enemy wasn't just the storm. The storm pounded the roof like a relentless drum, each gust of wind a physical blow against the old house. Snow lashed the window panes, and the cold seeped in through the cracks around the frames, a constant, creeping presence. Owen sat at the small kitchen table, the ceramic bowl of stew warming his raw hands. The fire in the hearth crackled and hissed, a small pocket of warmth in a world of freezing chaos. Cora moved with a quiet efficiency that he was beginning to recognize as her signature. She didn't fill the silence with useless chatter. She simply placed a bowl for herself on the table and sat down. He respected that. He was a man who preferred silence over empty words. He ate slowly, the taste of the stew, rich with beef, potatoes, and carrots, grounding him. It was simple food, honest food, and it was better than anything he'd eaten in weeks. He hadn't realized how hungry he was until the bowl was nearly empty. "You've been on the trail long?" she asked, finally breaking the silence. Her voice was soft, but it had an edge, like a well-honed blade. 5 years now, Owen said, setting his spoon down. "Since my family's farm went under back in East Texas. Been moving from job to job since, wherever someone needs a fence mended or a barn patched." She leaned back in her chair, her dark eyes studying him intently. "That doesn't sound like much of a life." He shrugged, a gesture that was more a defense than an admission. The horse was a powerful dark beast, and the man who rode it had an air of arrogant authority that Owen recognized instantly. It was the posture of a man who believes the world belongs to him. Cora's face tightened into a hard mask. "Boyd Hardwell," she muttered, the name a curse on her lips. "Friend of yours?" Owen asked dryly, though he already knew the answer. "Not hardly." Boyd swung down from his horse with a practiced, fluid motion, his expensive leather boots hitting the snow-covered ground with a soft thud. He was a big man, broad in the shoulder and thick in the gut, with a weathered face and a smile that never, ever reached his cold, calculating eyes. "Cora," he said, his voice a low drawl. He tipped his hat, but the gesture was pure mockery. "I see you've got company." "Morning, Boyd," she said, her tone as frosty as the air around them. "What brings you all the way out here?" "Just checking in on my neighbors after the storm," he said, his gaze sweeping over the ranch, lingering on the patch job Owen had done on the barn roof. "Word in town is you're trying to fix up the old barn. Didn't think you'd have the coin for that. Or the help." His eyes finally landed on Owen, flicking over him from head to toe, a dismissive, insulting appraisal. "And you are?" "Owen McDry," he said, his voice flat and even. "I'm here for the repairs." Boyd's smirk deepened. "Repairs, huh? Funny, those repairs seem to require an overnight stay." He chuckled, a low, unpleasant sound. A smart widow would know better than to give the gossips in town something to chew on. Cora's cheeks flushed with anger, but she stood her ground. "He's doing a job I hired him for, Boyd. That's all." "Well, I suppose a woman alone has to make do," Boyd said, his tone dripping with condescension. He looked at her, his eyes lingering in a way that made Owen's hands clench into fists at his sides. "But you be careful, Cora. A reputation is a fragile thing." Owen felt a hot surge of anger, but he held his tongue. Starting a fight in her yard wouldn't help her. It would only prove Boyd's point. "Was there something else you needed, Boyd?" Cora asked, her voice sharp as a razor. "Only to remind you that my offer still stands," Boyd said, pulling on his fine leather gloves. "This is no place for you. Sell the ranch to me while it's still worth something, before this winter buries it, and you for good." "I'm not selling," she said, her voice low and fierce. "Not now, not ever." The fake smile on Boyd's face finally slipped. For a second, a flicker of genuine, ugly anger showed in his eyes. He looked from her defiant face to Owen's stony one, and then back again. He swung himself back into the saddle with a grunt. "Suit yourself," he snarled. "But don't come crying to me when you're frozen and starved out. Don't say I didn't warn you." They watched in silence as he rode away, a dark blot on the pristine white landscape. The silence he left in his wake was heavier, more threatening than the silence of the storm. "Charming fellow," Owen said, his voice tight with suppressed rage. Cora crossed her arms over her chest, staring at the tracks Boyd's horse had left in the snow. "He wants this land. He's wanted it for years. His father tried to buy it from my father. He thinks if he just pushes hard enough, I'll break." "And will you?" Owen asked, his voice quiet but serious. She looked up at him then, and the fire was back in her eyes, burning away the fear. "No." That single, resolute word made the decision for him. All the doubts, all the ingrained habits of a man on the run, they just fell away. Owen straightened his shoulders. "About your offer," he said. "I'll need to see the books. Your ledger. If I'm staying, if this is a partnership, I want to know exactly what we're up against. I want to know what we're fighting for." A faint, weary smile touched her lips. It didn't quite reach her eyes, but it was a start. "Fair enough," she said. "I'll show you everything after supper." As the day wore on, Owen worked on the barn with a new, ferocious energy. Every nail he drove into the wood felt like an act of defiance. Every repaired board was a blow against Boyd Hardwell. He didn't say it out loud, but the thought of leaving, of moving on, felt like a betrayal. By nightfall, the frame of the barn looked stronger, straighter. This wasn't a simple case of a predator trying to force a widow off her land. This was the messy, violent aftermath of a criminal conspiracy. Boyd Hardwell wasn't just trying to scare Cora into selling. He was cleaning up. He was erasing the evidence. and the ledger in Owen's hands. This was the most dangerous piece of evidence of all. "He's not trying to get the ranch, Cora," Owen said, his voice low and urgent. "He's trying to get this book. This book is the proof that connects him to whatever deal he had with your husband. It's the only thing that can send him to prison." The full weight of it finally hit her. She sank into her chair, her face ashen. All this time she'd thought she was fighting for her home, for her husband's memory. Now she knew she was fighting for a lie, and sitting on a secret that could get her killed. "What do we do?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Owen's mind was racing. They couldn't go to the sheriff. If Miller had dismissed her suspicions about the murder so easily, he was either incompetent or, worse, in Hardwell's pocket. They were on their own, completely and utterly alone. "For now," Owen said, his voice taking on a new hardness, a commander's tone. "We do exactly what we've been doing. We fix the fences. We shore up the barn. We act like we're just trying to survive the winter. We give him no reason to think we know anything." He picked up the ledger. "And we hide this. Somewhere he will never find it." He looked around the small, sparse kitchen. Where could you hide something in a place a man like Hardwell would be willing to tear apart board by board? Then his eyes fell on the hearth. The fire was burning low. Beneath it was a thick layer of ash and soot. It was dirty, unpleasant work, the last place anyone would want to look. Without a word, he wrapped the ledger in a piece of oilcloth he found in a supply box. He knelt by the fireplace, using the poker to push aside the hot embers. He dug a shallow hole in the thick layer of old, cold ash beneath, placed the wrapped book inside, and carefully covered it back up, smoothing the ashes over the top. Then he nudged the glowing embers back into place. It was perfect. Unless the house burned down, the ledger was safe. Cora watched him, her eyes wide. "You've done this before," she said. It wasn't a question. Owen stood up, wiping the soot from his hands. He thought of the fire that had destroyed his family's barn, the fire he'd been blamed for. He thought of the real ledger, his father's, that had proved the railroad baron who'd framed him was a liar, a ledger that had disappeared in the flames. "I've learned a thing or two about keeping things safe," was all he said. He looked at her, standing there in her small kitchen, the world she knew shattered around her. She was terrified, but she wasn't broken. The steel was still there, tempered now by a terrible truth. "I'm in this with you, Cora," he said, his voice quiet but absolute. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." She gave a single shaky nod. The partnership they had agreed to that morning had just been sealed in secrets and ash. It wasn't about a share of profits anymore. It was about survival. The days that followed took on a new, sharp-edged reality. Every nail Owen hammered, every fence post he set, felt like part of a larger strategy. They were no longer just repairing a ranch, they were fortifying a position. The work was grueling, the Montana winter tightening its grip with each passing day. The wind had a constant, hungry sound, and the snow piled up in deep drifts against the barn and the house. Owen and Cora worked side by side from sunup to sundown, their conversation sparse and practical. But a new kind of understanding grew between them in the shared labor and the unspoken tension. He saw the grim determination in her every move, the way she pushed herself past the point of exhaustion without complaint. She, in turn, saw the quiet watchfulness in his eyes, the way he constantly scanned the horizon, the way he paused whenever a horse crested a distant ridge. They were two soldiers in a silent war, waiting for the enemy's next move. It came on a Tuesday, a week after they hid the ledger. Owen was on the roof of the barn, securing the last of the new planks, when he saw the rider. It wasn't Boyd Hardwell. It was a younger man, one he recognized from the general store in town. The man rode into the yard and dismounted, looking nervous. "Mrs. Lundy?" he called out. Cora came out onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. Owen shimmied down the ladder, staying close. "Got a delivery for you," the man said, pulling a folded paper from his coat. From the bank. Mr. Henderson said it was urgent. Cora took the letter, her face pale. She unfolded it, her eyes scanning the neat typed lines. Owen watched her expression crumble. The steel in her spine seemed to melt away, replaced by a look of utter defeat. "What is it?" he asked, his voice low. She handed him the letter without a word. He read it quickly. The formal, unforgiving language of the bank jumped out at him. Due to her outstanding debt and the reported poor condition of the property, they were calling in her loan. The entire amount was due in 30 days. If she couldn't pay, the bank would foreclose and the property would be sold at public auction. 30 days. It was a death sentence. "Reported poor condition," Owen said, his eyes narrowing on the phrase. "That's Boyd's work. He's gone to the bank. He's told them the place is falling apart, that you're a widow who can't handle it. He's convinced them you're a bad investment." "It doesn't matter how he did it," Cora whispered, her voice choked. "We can't pay it. We don't have the money. It's over. He's won." "No," Owen said, his voice a low growl. He crumpled the letter in his fist. "It's not over. It's a threat. He's trying to flush us out. He wants us to panic, to try and sell the cattle cheap, to run to him for a deal. He wants that ledger, Cora, and he thinks this will force you to give it to him." "But what can we do?" she cried, the desperation finally breaking through her composure. "We have nothing!" "We have this ranch," Owen said, his gaze sweeping over the property. "We have the herd, small as it is, and we have the truth, hidden in the fireplace. That's not nothing." He looked at her, his eyes blazing with a fierce, protective fire. "I've been run off my land once. I won't let it happen again. Not to you." His certainty seemed to calm her. The panic in her eyes receded, replaced by a flicker of her old defiance. "What's your plan?" she asked. He didn't have one, not yet, but he knew they had one card to play, one that Boyd Hardwell wouldn't expect. "Tomorrow," he said, "we ride into town, not to the bank, to the telegraph office." Cora looked at him, confused. "The telegraph? Who are you going to telegraph?" Owen's expression was grim. "An old friend. A man who owes me a favor. It's a long shot, Cora, the longest shot there is, but right now, it's the only one we've got." He didn't tell her who the man was. He didn't tell her that sending the telegraph would mean revealing his true identity, the name he had run from for 5 years. He didn't tell her that it could either save them or bring his own past crashing down on them both, getting them thrown in jail or worse. He just looked at her, standing there in the snow, looking so small and so strong all at once. And he knew he would risk it. He would risk everything. For her. For this place. The ride into town was cold and silent. The sky was a sheet of iron, and the wind cut through their coats, chilling them to the bone. Owen felt Cora's anxiety beside him. It was a palpable thing, as real as the crunch of their horses' hooves on the frozen road. He knew she was putting a desperate, terrifying amount of faith in him, in a plan he hadn't even explained. The weight of that trust was heavier than any winter storm. Miles City wasn't much of a town. A single dusty street lined with squat, false-fronted buildings. The general store, the saloon, the sheriff's office, and at the very end, the telegraph office. As they dismounted, Owen saw Sheriff Miller standing on the boardwalk outside his office, talking to none other than Boyd Hardwell. Hardwell saw them instantly. A slow, triumphant smirk spread across his face. He said something to the sheriff, who laughed, and then Boyd tipped his hat to Cora in that same mocking way he always did. He was gloating. He knew about the bank notice. He was enjoying watching them squirm. "Don't look at him," Owen said to Cora in a low voice, grabbing her arm gently. "Keep your head up. We're not here for him." He guided her past them, his eyes fixed straight ahead, ignoring the smug look on Hardwell's face. He could feel Boyd's eyes on his back, could almost hear the man's satisfied chuckle. The telegraph office was a small, cramped room that smelled of ozone and damp wool. The operator, a skinny man with a green eyeshade and ink-stained fingers, looked up at them over his spectacles. "Help you?" he asked, his voice bored. Owen stepped up to the counter. He took a piece of paper and a pencil, his hand surprisingly steady. The moment of truth had arrived. For 5 years he had been Owen McDree, a ghost, a drifter with no past. Now he had to bury that ghost. He wrote out the message, his pencil strokes firm and clear. Marshall Reed, Austin, Texas. Stop. Landowner framed me for arson. 5 years ago is dead. Stop. His son confessed. Stop. My name is cleared. Stop. Am in Miles City, Montana. Stop. Need your help. Stop. The man who took my land is nothing compared to the one I've found here. Stop. His name is Boyd Hardwell. Stop. He is a rustler and a murderer. Stop. Bringing proof. Stop. He signed it, not with the name he'd used for half a decade, but with his real one. Liam Travis. He pushed the paper and a few coins across the counter to the operator. The man read the message, his eyebrows shooting up into his hairline. He looked from the paper to Owen, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and fear. The name Travis, connected to the fire at the big railroad ranch down in Texas, had been news even way up here. You're him? The operator stammered. Just send the message, Owen, Liam said, his voice hard as stone. He turned to Cora, who was staring at him, her face a mask of confusion and dawning comprehension. Liam Travis? She whispered. It's my real name, he said quietly. It's a long story, Cora. One I'll tell you on the way home. For now, all you need to know is that Marshall Reed is an honest man, and he believes me. As they stepped back out onto the street, the cold air felt different, sharper, more dangerous. Boyd Hardwell was still there, leaning against a post, a smug look on his face. He'd clearly been waiting for them. Wasting your money on telegrams, Cora? He drawled. Sending a cry for help to your long-lost relatives? There's no one coming to save you. Owen stopped, turning to face him fully. The time for hiding was over. The time for pretense was done. The message wasn't for her relatives, Owen said, his voice calm and clear, carrying in the still air. It was for a U.S. Marshal, and it wasn't a cry for help. He took a step closer, his eyes locking with Hardwell's. It was a promise. We have the ledger, Boyd. The one with your initials in it. The one that proves you and Thomas were rustling cattle together. The one that gives you a motive for shutting him up when he wanted out. The smirk vanished from Hardwell's face. His ruddy complexion went pale, his eyes widening in shock and fury. He had underestimated them. He had underestimated the drifter. You're bluffing, he snarled, but there was a tremor of fear in his voice. There is no ledger. Then why don't you come out to the ranch and look for it? Owen challenged, his voice ringing with confidence. Tear the whole place apart if you want. But the marshal is on his way, and when he gets here he's going to have a lot of questions for you. About the cattle, about the saw marks on Cora's barn, and about the bruises on Thomas Lundy's knuckles. Every word was a hammer blow. Hardwell was stunned, speechless. He looked from Owen's implacable face to Cora's defiant one. He had lost control. The game had changed, and he was suddenly on the defensive. Owen turned his back on him, a gesture of ultimate dismissal. Come on, Cora, let's go home. They mounted their horses and rode out of town, leaving Boyd Hardwell standing frozen on the boardwalk, his face a thunderous mask of hate. The bluff had been played. The gauntlet had been thrown down. But as they rode, Owen knew the terrible truth. He had just painted a massive target on both their backs. Hardwell wasn't the kind of man to wait for a U.S. Marshal to arrive. He was the kind of man who buried his problems, permanently. The ride home was a race against a clock they couldn't see. They had poked the bear. Now the bear was coming for them. And the storm that was about to break would make the winter blizzard feel like a spring breeze. The story Liam told on the ride back to the ranch was stark and brutal, delivered in the same clipped, no-nonsense tone he used for everything. He'd been the foreman on his father's ranch, the Travis spread, down in Texas. A powerful railroad baron named Abernathy had wanted their land for a new line. When his father refused to sell, Abernathy started a campaign of intimidation, cutting fences, spooking cattle, poisoning wells. It had culminated one night in a fire that destroyed their main barn and killed half their herd. Abernathy, with the local sheriff in his pocket, had produced a witness who claimed to have seen Liam starting the blaze. Facing a hanging, Liam had fled. He'd become Owen McDry, a drifter, constantly looking over his shoulder, waiting for the past to catch up. He'd only recently heard from another drifter that old man Abernathy had died, and his guilt-ridden son had confessed the whole scheme, clearing Liam's name. The Telegraph had been the first time he'd reached out, the first time he'd dared to use his own name in 5 years. Cora listened in silence, her heart aching for the years he had lost, for the life that had been stolen from him. It explained so much: his watchfulness, his distrust of authority, his immediate understanding of her own situation. He wasn't just a man who knew what it was to lose something. He was a man who knew what it was to have something taken by force and lies. "So the marshal, he'll really come?" she asked, her voice small against the vast, empty landscape. "He'll come," Liam said with certainty. "Reed is a man of his word, but he's coming from Texas, Cora. It could take him a week, maybe more." He looked at her, his expression grim. "Boyd Hardwell isn't going to wait a week. My bluff in town bought us some time, but it also made us his #1 priority. He has to get that ledger before Reed arrives, and he has to make sure we can't talk." The unspoken meaning of his words hung in the air. Make sure we can't talk, ever again. The ranch, when they finally saw it, no longer looked like a sanctuary. It looked like a trap, an isolated, indefensible position in the middle of a vast, empty wilderness. They were completely, utterly alone. "He'll come tonight," Liam said as they unsaddled the horses. "He can't risk waiting for daylight. He'll come after dark, and he'll bring his men." "How many men does he have?" Cora asked, her voice trembling slightly. "I've seen at least 2 that ride with him regularly, but a man with his money can buy more. We have to assume he'll bring at least 4 or 5, enough to surround the place." Panic, cold and sharp, tried to claw its way up Cora's throat, but she swallowed it down. She had come too far to break now. "What do we do? We have 1 rifle and my father's old shotgun." "We don't fight them head on," Liam said, his mind already working, his eyes scanning the layout of the ranch, not as a home, but as a battlefield. "We use what we have. We use the land. We use the dark. We turn this place into a nightmare for them." His plan was born of desperation and a deep, intimate knowledge of how men like Hardwell thought. They wouldn't just ride in shooting. They would be cautious, trying to use the darkness and the element of surprise. They would expect fear. They would expect a couple huddled in the house, waiting for the end. They would not expect a fight. First, he had Cora bring every lamp in the house to the front windows. "Light them all," he instructed. "Make it look like we're awake, watching, waiting for them at the front. We want them to think we're amateurs. We want them to circle around, to come from the back, where it's dark." While she did that, he went to the barn. He worked with a feverish intensity, his movements economical and precise. He gathered coils of rope, the spare planks of wood, the heavy iron tools. He moved Patches and Cora's mare to the far end of the corral, keeping them out of the line of fire. As darkness fell, deep and absolute, the ranch felt like it was holding its breath. The lamps in the house cast a brave, lonely glow against the immense blackness. It was a beacon, a challenge. Liam led Cora not to the house but to the hayloft in the newly repaired barn. It offered the high ground, a perfect vantage point overlooking the back of the house and the path from the eastern pasture, the direction Hardwell would most likely come from. He handed her the shotgun. "You know how to use this?" he asked. She nodded, her hands tight on the stock. "My father taught me." "Good. Don't fire unless I tell you to. Don't fire unless they're so close you can't miss. Your job is to watch the path to the house. My job is everything else." He settled himself near the main loft door, his rifle resting on the sill. They waited. The silence was a physical thing, pressing in on them. Every creak of the old barn, every rustle of the wind, sent a jolt of adrenaline through Cora's veins. Hours seemed to crawl by. The moon, a pale sliver, rose and cast long, eerie shadows across the snow. Cora began to think maybe he was wrong. Maybe they weren't coming. Then Liam touched her arm. He didn't speak, just pointed. She saw them. 5 figures on horseback, moving slowly, cautiously out of the dark line of trees to the east. They were staying low, using the shadows of the rolling hills as cover. They were moving toward the back of the house, just as Liam had predicted. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. The men dismounted about 100 yards from the house, leaving one man with the horses. The other 4, including the broad, unmistakable shape of Boyd Hardwell, began to advance on foot, spreading out, their forms like black ghosts against the snow. They carried rifles. Liam let them get closer, closer. He let them get to the edge of the corral, right where the shadows were deepest. He let them get comfortable, confident that they were unseen. Then he pulled a small, thin rope he had tied to the rafter beside him. Down below, the rope was connected to the latch on the main corral gate. The gate swung open with a loud, sudden creak. At the same time, Liam let out a sharp, piercing whistle. It was the signal for the trap. A second rope, which he'd strung across the yard earlier, was connected to a series of tin cans and old horseshoes hanging just inside the barn. When the gate opened, it pulled the line taut, and the entire contraption came crashing down onto the tin roof of the chicken coop with an unholy racket. The effect was instantaneous and chaotic. The horses, already skittish, reared in terror at the sudden noise. The man holding them cursed and fought to control them. Hardwell and his men, startled, spun around, rifles raised, firing blindly at the source of the sound, the barn. Splinters flew from the old wood as bullets slammed into the walls around Liam and Cora. "Stay down!" Liam yelled, pulling her away from the opening. But the first part of the plan had worked perfectly. He had broken their stealthy advance. He had created chaos, and most importantly, he had made them reveal their positions. In the confusion, while Hardwell's men were distracted by the panicked horses and the noise from the barn, Liam slipped out a side opening in the hayloft, sliding down a slanted roof and dropping silently into the deep snowdrift below. He was now outside, in the darkness, circling them. The hunter had just become the hunted. Boyd Hardwell was furious. The element of surprise was gone, shattered by a cheap, stupid trick. The drifter was smarter than he'd thought. "Spread out!" he roared to his men over the panicked whinnying of the horses. "He's in the barn! Flush him out! 2 of you circle around the sides! Johnson, get those damn horses under control!" 2 of his men broke off, creeping along the shadows of the fence line, trying to get a clear shot into the barn's side openings. Hardwell and the remaining man, a lanky cowboy named Peters, advanced on the main barn doors, using a water trough for cover. "McDree!" Hardwell bellowed, his voice raw with rage. "You can't hide in there forever. Give me the ledger and the woman, and I'll let you ride out of here alive." There was no answer but the lonely whistle of the wind. From the hayloft, Cora watched, her heart pounding. Liam was gone. She was alone. She clutched the shotgun, its cold weight a small comfort. She could see Hardwell and Peters moving closer. She remembered Liam's instructions. Don't fire unless they're so close you can't miss. Suddenly, from the darkness behind the woodshed, a voice called out, "Over here, Boyd!" Hardwell and Peters spun around, firing in the direction of the voice, but it was another trick. Liam had thrown his voice, drawing their fire, making them waste ammunition and expose their backs to the main yard. And that's when the second trap was sprung. As Hardwell's 2 men circled the barn, they had to cross a narrow path between the coop and the tack room. A path where Liam had spent an hour that afternoon, stretching a thin, nearly invisible strand of wire about 6 inches off the ground. The first man hit it at a run. His feet went out from under him, and he went down hard with a surprised grunt, his rifle flying from his hands. His partner stopped, confused, and in that moment of hesitation, a dark shape rose from the snowdrift beside the tack room. It was Liam. He brought a solid hickory fence post down in a single brutal arc. The second man collapsed without a sound. 2 down. Hardwell heard the commotion and cursed, realizing he'd been tricked again. "Peter's with me!" he yelled, abandoning his cover and charging toward the side of the barn. But Liam was already moving, melting back into the shadows, using his knowledge of every dip and rut in the yard. He was a ghost in the dark, a phantom moving on the edges of their vision. Inside the loft, Cora saw Hardwell and Peters run past the front of the barn. This was her chance. They were exposed, their attention focused on where they'd last seen Liam. She raised the shotgun, its double barrels looking huge and terrifying in the moonlight. She took a deep breath, just as her father had taught her, aimed for the ground in front of them, and pulled the trigger. The shotgun roared, a deafening blast that echoed across the plains. The buckshot tore into the frozen ground at Hardwell's feet, spraying dirt and snow and ice into the air. He and Peters yelled in surprise and dove for cover, scrambling behind a large hayrick. They were pinned. The blast also served as a signal. It told Liam exactly where Hardwell was. The final piece of the plan was the most dangerous. Liam had one target, Johnson, the man who was still struggling with the spooked horses. He was their only way out. Without horses, they were stranded, miles from anywhere, in the freezing cold. Liam circled around the far side of the corral, coming up behind Johnson, who was desperately trying to calm a terrified mare. "Let them go," Liam said, his voice quiet in the night. Johnson spun around, his eyes wide with fear, his hand going for the pistol on his hip. He never made it. Liam was faster, his fist connecting with Johnson's jaw in a single sharp blow. Johnson crumpled to the ground. Liam grabbed the reins of the horses, gave the lead mare a hard slap on the rump, and sent them galloping off into the darkness of the plains. Their escape was gone. He fired his rifle once into the air. "Your horses are gone, Boyd!" he yelled, his voice echoing in the sudden silence. "Your men are down! It's over! The marshal is coming! You can freeze out here, or you can give up!" There was a long, tense silence. Cora could hear Hardwell cursing from behind the hayrick. The fight had gone out of them. They were trapped, exposed, and defeated. Then, a new sound cut through the night. It was the steady, rhythmic sound of multiple horses, approaching at a disciplined canter, and the jingle of official tack. A powerful voice boomed out of the darkness from the main road. "This is United States Marshal John Reed. Throw down your weapons and come out with your hands in the air." A wave of relief so profound it almost buckled Cora's knees washed over her. He had come. Liam's long shot had paid off. From behind the hayrick, Boyd Hardwell let out a scream of pure animal rage and frustration. He stood up, his rifle raised, his face a mask of insane fury. He wasn't aiming at the barn or at the direction of the marshal's voice. He was aiming directly at the front of the house, where the lamps still glowed, where he thought Cora was hiding. He was going to take her with him. "No!" Cora screamed from the hayloft. But before Hardwell could pull the trigger, a single shot rang out from the darkness near the corral. It was sharp, precise, and final. Boyd Hardwell stiffened. A look of surprise crossed his face. He dropped his rifle, clutched at his shoulder, and then collapsed into the snow. Liam stepped out of the shadows, his rifle still smoking, his face grim and set. He hadn't killed him. He had aimed for the shoulder. Boyd Hardwell wasn't worth the hanging. He deserved to rot in a prison cell. Men with stars on their chests swarmed the yard. They rounded up a dazed Peters, cuffed the unconscious men, and tended to Hardwell's wound. In the center of it all stood a tall, broad-shouldered man with a weathered face and kind, intelligent eyes. He saw Liam standing by the corral and a slow grin spread across his face. "Liam Travis," Marshal Reed said, his voice booming. "It's been a long time. Looks like you found yourself a whole new kind of trouble up here." "You have no idea, John," Liam said, a weary smile touching his lips. He looked up at the barn, at the hayloft where Cora was now slowly, shakily, making her way down the ladder. Their eyes met across the chaotic, moonlit yard. The siege was over. The war was won. The truth, buried under layers of lies, deceit, and violence, had finally been brought into the light. Cora walked toward Liam, her steps unsteady but sure. When she reached him, she didn't say a word. She just threw her arms around him, burying her face in his chest, and for the first time since her husband's death, she let the tears come. He held her tight, the cold rifle in his hand forgotten as the Montana dawn began to break, promising a new and better day. The aftermath was a whirlwind of order replacing chaos. Marshal Reed and his deputies were brutally efficient. They took detailed statements from Liam and Cora, documenting everything from the sawn barn beam to the final desperate shootout. They retrieved the oilcloth-wrapped ledger from the ashes of the hearth, its cryptic symbols and damning initials providing the ironclad proof they needed. Boyd Hardwell, groaning and cursing through his bandaged shoulder, was hauled away along with his men, their reign of terror in the valley finally at an end. As the sun climbed higher, casting a warm golden light over the snow-covered ranch, the place felt different. It was quiet again, but this time it was a peaceful silence, not a menacing one. The weight that had been pressing down on the land, on Cora, seemed to have lifted. Marshal Reed stood on the porch with Liam, sipping a cup of Cora's strong, hot coffee. "The Abernathy case is officially closed," Reed said, his eyes scanning the horizon. "The sun gave a full confession. Your name is cleared, Liam. You're a free man. You can go back to Texas, claim what's left of your father's land if you want." Liam looked out at the rolling white hills of the Lundy Ranch. He thought of the dry, dusty plains of Texas, a place of ghosts and bad memories. Then he looked at the sturdy repaired barn, at the fences that now stood straight and true. He thought of the woman inside the house, the woman with steel in her spine and fire in her eyes. "I don't think my home is in Texas anymore, John," he said quietly. Reed followed his gaze and saw Cora step out onto the porch, a tray with more coffee in her hands. She looked tired, her face bruised with exhaustion, but she was smiling, a real, genuine smile that lit up her whole face. The marshal, a man who'd seen the best and worst of humanity, understood completely. He finished his coffee and set the cup down. "Well, I've got prisoners to transport and a report to file that's going to be a mile long. You two take care of yourselves." He shook Liam's hand firmly. "It's good to have you back in the world, son." With a final nod to Cora, Marshal Reed mounted up and led his deputies away, leaving Liam and Cora alone in the quiet morning. They stood on the porch for a long time, not speaking, simply watching the tracks of the lawmen fade into the distance. The air was clean and cold, filled with the promise of spring thaw. "Liam Travis," Cora said softly, trying the name out. "It suits you better than Owen McDry." He turned to her, a small smile playing on his lips. "I was getting tired of being him anyway." "What will you do now?" she asked, though she felt like she already knew the answer. He took a step closer, his gaze serious and direct. "Cora, the partnership we agreed to, a share of the profits in exchange for my work, that was for a man named Owen McDry. He was a drifter just passing through." He reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers wrapping gently around hers. "Liam Travis is looking for something different. He's looking for a place to build, a place to put down roots, a home." Her breath caught in her throat. Her heart, which she thought had been through enough pounding for one lifetime, began to beat faster. "This ranch," he continued, his voice low and steady, "it's your land. I know that. But if you'd have me, I'd like to share more than just the work and the profits. I'd like to share the life that comes with it. The good days and the bad, the spring thaws and the winter storms." Tears welled in her eyes, but these were not tears of grief or fear. They were tears of hope. "I think," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "that this ranch has been waiting for a man like Liam Travis for a very long time." He smiled, a real wide grin that transformed his weary face, and he pulled her into his arms. Standing on the porch of the home they had fought for, the home they had saved, they knew the long, hard winter was finally over. The The struggles had forged them into something stronger than they had ever been apart. Together, they had a future, as vast and full of promise as the Montana sky above them. They rebuilt. Not just the fences and the barn, but the herd, the business, and the hope. The auction of Boyd Hardwell's lands, seized by the government, helped clear the Lundy Ranch's debts to the bank, and with the coming of spring, the fields were planted, green, and vibrant. The name Lundy Travis Ranch began to appear on shipping manifests, a symbol of resilience and justice that was known throughout the territory. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple, Liam stood with Cora on the porch, his arm around her shoulders. He held a rough-drawn sketch in his hand. It was a plan for a new room to be added to the house, a room with a big window that faced east. "So we can see every new day start, right from the beginning," he explained. Cora leaned her head on his shoulder, a feeling of peace settling over her, so deep and complete it felt like a dream. "Sounds like a perfect idea," she said softly. They had faced down murder, corruption, and the very worst of the Montana winter. They had earned their peace, and they had found in each other a love as strong and enduring as the land itself. The fight was over. Their life was just beginning. If you were gripped by Cora and Liam's fight for their future and believe that some things are always worth fighting for, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for more stories of justice and survival against all odds. The shed's just behind the house. Owen pulled on his coat and stepped out into the maelstrom. The cold was a physical shock, the wind tearing the breath from his lungs and the snowflakes stinging his face like needles. He fought his way to the woodshed, a small, sturdy structure that was thankfully still standing. He grabbed an armful of split logs, his boots sinking deep into the rapidly accumulating snow on the trip back. When he stumbled back inside, his face was numb and his fingers ached. Cora met him at the door, taking some of the logs from his arms. For a brief second their hands brushed, an unexpected point of contact, a flicker of warmth in the frozen night that lingered in Owen's mind longer than it should have. "Thank you," she said, stacking the wood near the hearth. "Not a problem," he replied, brushing the snow from his coat. He looked from the fire to her, his expression serious. "Your barn will hold for the night, but that beam needs to be replaced, and soon. And the fences, this storm is going to tear them to pieces if they're not already down." Her shoulders stiffened slightly. The weight of it all was pressing down on her again. "I know. I'll find a way." Owen studied her, recognizing the brittle pride in her voice. It was the same pride he'd seen in his own father, right before he lost everything. "You don't have to do it all alone, you know," he said quietly. Her jaw tightened. "People keep saying that. But help always comes with strings, Mr. McDry, and I've had enough of those to last a lifetime." He nodded, understanding more than she could possibly realize. Not all help comes that way. Sometimes a job is just a job. His eyes met hers across the firelight, and for a long moment, something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of shared wounds, of stubborn pride, and of the simple, brutal fact that they were both survivors. As the evening wore on, she offered him a cup of coffee, strong and black. "Thomas used to say a good cup of coffee could get a man through a bad winter," she said, a ghost of a smile on her lips. "Sounds like he was a wise man," Owen replied. Her gaze softened. "He was. I wish he'd had more time." There was nothing he could say to that, nothing that wouldn't sound hollow. The storm raged on, and eventually Cora rose, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. "You'll be all right in the barn loft? There's a clean pile of hay and some extra blankets I put out there." "I'll manage," Owen said. She nodded, pausing in the doorway to the hall. "Good night, Mr. McDry." "Owen," he corrected her gently. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Good night, Owen." He watched her disappear down the dim hallway before he pulled on his coat and braced himself for the walk back to the barn. The cold hit him like a fist, but his mind wasn't on the weather. It was on the woman in that house, standing her ground against a world determined to sweep her away. Lying in the hayloft, with the wind clawing at the boards of his patched-up roof, Owen stared into the darkness. He'd told himself 100 times, 1,000 times not to get involved, not to stay anywhere long enough to care. It was the drifter's creed, the only rule that kept him safe. But as he listened to the storm trying to tear down the barn he'd just started to fix, and thought of the woman who believed her husband's bull was innocent, he knew he had already broken his rule. He wasn't just fixing a barn, he was shoring up a defense, and as sleep finally began to claim him, one thought lingered, sharp and clear in his mind. Boyd Hardwell had started this fight. Owen was damn well going to finish it. The world was born again in silence. When Owen woke, the storm had passed. A thick, pristine blanket of snow covered everything, muting all sound and turning the Lundy Ranch into a landscape of shimmering white under a pale, watery sun. He rose from the hayloft, brushing the straw from his coat, and took a deep breath of the crisp, clean air. His muscles ached, a dull, familiar complaint from the previous day's work, but it was the ache of purpose, not of weariness. He saw her immediately. Cora was already outside, a dark figure against the brilliant snow, scattering feed for a small, hardy flock of chickens that had emerged from their coop. She wore a heavy wool shawl, and her breath rose in pale clouds. She moved with that same unhurried, resolute rhythm he'd come to recognize. This was a woman who met every day, no matter how harsh, head-on. He walked toward her, his boots crunching in the fresh snow. "Morning," he called out. She glanced up, her dark eyes assessing him. He felt like he was being measured, weighed for something she hadn't yet decided. "Morning," she replied, turning back to her chore. "The barn keep you warm enough?" "Warm enough," he said. "Could have been worse." "You've had worse, I imagine," she stated, not unkindly. "Plenty," he admitted with a faint smile. She finished with the chickens and turned to face him, brushing her hands on her apron. The gesture was automatic, ingrained. "There's coffee on the stove. Come inside before you freeze solid." The kitchen was warm and smelled of wood smoke and roasted coffee beans. He took off his gloves and held his hands out to the fire in the hearth, letting the warmth seep into his stiff fingers. Cora poured him a cup without asking, her movements economical and precise. She was not a woman who wasted anything, not words, not motion, not time. He took a sip. Good coffee. She sat across from him at the small table, her posture straight, her hands clasped loosely in front of her. "You work fast," she noted, her gaze direct. "You already replaced half the damaged planks yesterday." "The storm helped me stay busy," he said. "Work's the easiest way to shut out the noise in my head." She studied him for a long moment, a silent appraisal. "You've been moving for 5 years. Don't you ever get tired of it?" He didn't answer right away. He stared into the black coffee in his cup. "Sometimes," he said at last. "But stopping feels worse. A man who stops moving doesn't always find a reason to start up again." Her gaze was unwavering. What if he was given a reason? He looked up sharply, the question catching him off guard. It was too pointed, too direct. "What kind of reason?" Cora's expression didn't soften, but her voice was steady, stripped of all artifice. "This place needs more than a roof, Owen. You've seen it. The fences are down, the herd is thin, and the bank is breathing down my neck. I've been trying to do it all alone, but I'm not a fool. I know I can't keep this ranch running through a whole winter by myself. I don't have family to call on. I don't have anyone." Owen set his cup down, leaning back slightly. The air in the room felt charged, heavy with unspoken possibilities. "You're asking for more than a few days of repairs." "I'm not asking for a handout," she said, her voice sharp with pride. "I'm proposing a partnership. I can't pay you much in cash, not right now. But if you stay, if you help me fight for this place, help me rebuild it, I'll give you a share. A full, fair share of whatever this ranch earns come spring. No charity, just work, room and board, and a stake in the profits, if there are any profits. The offer hung in the air between them, bold and unexpected. It wasn't just a job. It was a lifeline she was throwing him, but it was also an anchor. To stay meant to put down roots, even shallow ones, in a place that was actively hostile. It meant making her fight his fight. It meant facing Boyd Hardwell. He rubbed the back of his neck, a nervous habit he thought he'd long since broken. "You trust a complete stranger that much?" "I trust what I see," Cora said, her voice firm. "You don't waste words. You don't cut corners. You looked at a sawn beam and called it what it was. You didn't just patch the hole and take my money. You work like a man who understands what it means to lose something." Her words hit him harder than a physical blow. He thought of his father's farm, of the relentless sun and the parched earth, of the quiet shame in his father's eyes the day the banker came. He thought of the fire, the accusations, the reason he was calling himself McDree in the first place. She was right. He knew loss. He knew it intimately. And maybe that's why her offer didn't sound crazy. Maybe it was the only thing that had made sense in a very long time. Before he could form a reply, the sound of hoofbeats cut through the morning stillness. Both their heads snapped toward the window. A rider was approaching from the east, a large, broad silhouette against the glaring white snow. It's better than starving on land that won't grow a thing. At least this way I work, I eat, I keep moving. Cora's gaze lingered on him for a moment longer before she turned her eyes to the fire. "Moving isn't always living, Mr. McDree." The words settled between them, heavy and resonant, as if she knew that truth from personal, painful experience. He watched her as she sat across from him, her hands wrapped around her own bowl. The firelight cast flickering shadows across her face, highlighting the lines of strain around her eyes. She was a woman stretched to her breaking point. "You said your husband was murdered," he said, getting straight to the point. The time for dancing around the subject was over. The storm outside and the sawn beam in the barn had seen to that. "You want to tell me about it?" Her knuckles whitened around the bowl. For a second, he thought she would shut him down, tell him it was none of his business. But instead, she took a slow, steadying breath. "His name was Thomas," she began, her voice low and tight. "We built this place together, poured every ounce of sweat and every dollar we had into it. He was a good man, strong. He knew this land." She paused, her eyes distant. "About 8 months ago, they found him out in the east pasture. The official story is that our bull, Old Red, gored him, said he got too close and the bull turned on him. It happens." "But you don't believe that," Owen stated. It wasn't a question. She shook her head slowly, a bitter smile twisting her lips. "Old Red was as gentle as a lamb. Thomas raised him from a calf. That bull would eat apples out of my hand. He wouldn't have hurt a fly, let alone Thomas." Her eyes met his across the table, and the fire in them burned hot. And there was something else. Thomas had bruises on his knuckles, like he'd been in a fist fight. And his favorite hat. It was found 50 yards away, near the creek bed. Why would his hat be over there if the bull got him by the fence? "Did you tell the sheriff this?" Owen asked. She let out a short, harsh laugh. "Sheriff Miller? He's a good man, but he's comfortable. He saw a big bull and a dead man and he closed the case. He told me grief was making me see shadows where there were none. He patted my hand and told me to sell the ranch to Boyd Hardwell and move to town, where a woman belongs." The name hung in the air. "Boyd Hardwell?" "Our neighbor to the east," she said, her voice turning to ice. "He owns the biggest spread in this county, and he's wanted this piece of it for as long as I can remember. Thomas always said Boyd's greed was bigger than his land. He made Thomas an offer a month before he died. Thomas turned him down flat, said he'd never sell." Now the pieces were starting to click into place. A dead husband, a convenient accident, a greedy neighbor, and now a sabotaged barn. "Hardwell paid you a visit after Thomas died?" Owen guessed. "The day after the funeral," she confirmed, her expression grim. Offered me half of what he'd offered Thomas. Said he was doing me a favor, taking this burden off my hands. When I told him to get off my property, he just smiled. He said this land gives up on people who try to hold it alone. He said he was a patient man. Owen leaned back, processing it all. This wasn't just a land grab, the violence of it, a murder staged as an accident, the deliberate destruction of the barn, it was personal. It was a cruel, systematic campaign to break her. The sawed beam, he said. That was Hardwell's message. He's tired of being patient. I know, she whispered. They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the roar of the storm. The cozy kitchen suddenly felt like the last safe place in a very dangerous world. The warmth of the fire couldn't touch the chill that had settled deep in Owen's gut. He had walked into a war, and Cora Lundy was fighting it all by herself. When he finished his stew, he stood and carried his bowl to the wash basin. Thank you for the meal, Mrs. Lundy. Cora, she corrected him, her voice a little stronger now. Just Cora. He glanced back at her. A hint of a smile touched the corner of his mouth. All right, Cora. You want me to bring in some more wood for the night? A storm like this, you'll burn through that pile before morning. She hesitated, then gave a single, grateful nod. That would be helpful. Cora brought him a cup of coffee as he was tightening the last bolt on a new support beam. Do you always work like the world might end tomorrow? She asked quietly. He looked down at her from the ladder, a genuine grin spreading across his face for the first time that day. It's the only way to make sure it doesn't. Her gaze lingered on him for a long moment, and there was something new in it, something like hope. Then maybe, she said softly, this place has a chance after all. And for the first time in 5 long years, Owen McDry allowed himself to wonder if she might be right. But as he looked at the ledger she placed on the table that night, he saw the real enemy wasn't just Boyd Hardwell. It was the crushing weight of numbers, of debts, and of secrets hidden in the ink. The real fight was just beginning. The ledger was old, its leather cover cracked, and its pages brittle with age. Cora opened it on the kitchen table under the warm glow of the oil lamp. The fire crackled in the hearth, a comforting sound against the vast, cold silence of the Montana night. Owen leaned over the book, the scent of old paper and ink filling his nostrils. This was the heart of the ranch, its story told in columns of numbers, and it was a grim story. Cora's finger traced a line of entries. This was the loan for the seed last spring. This was for the new plow that broke 2 weeks later. This was the veterinarian bill for the cattle sickness that took 6 of our best heifers. Each entry was a blow, a setback. The numbers were a testament to their struggle, to the razor-thin margin they had lived on. Then he saw the biggest number, circled in red. The mortgage payment to the bank in Miles City. It was due in 3 months, and it was a sum that seemed impossible. He's got you cornered, Owen said quietly, his eyes fixed on the final damning figure. Boyd knows about the bank. He knows you can't make that payment. Thomas was trying, Cora said, her voice barely a whisper. He was working on a deal, something that was supposed to clear our debts, and then some. He was secretive about it. He just told me to trust him. Her finger tapped a series of strange entries in the margins of the last few pages. They weren't numbers, they were symbols. A small circle, a cross, a triangle, and next to them, single letters, B-H. What are these? Owen asked, pointing to the cryptic marks. Cora shook her head, a frown creasing her brow. I don't know. They started appearing a few months before he died. Whenever I asked, he'd just get angry and close the book. He said it was ranch business, that I didn't need to worry my head about it. Owen stared at the symbols. B.H. Boyd Hardwell. It was too much of a coincidence. Thomas Lundy, a man desperate to save his ranch, had been involved in some kind of secret deal with the very man who wanted to take it from him. He was doing business with Hardwell, Owen said, the pieces locking into place with a sickening click. Your husband was working with him, Cora. She recoiled as if he'd slapped her. No, never. Thomas hated him. He would never— Desperate men do desperate things, Owen said gently, but his eyes were hard. What kind of deal could a small rancher make with a man like Boyd Hardwell that would clear all this debt? The unspoken answer hung in the air between them, ugly and dangerous, rustling, changing brands, moving stolen cattle across county lines. It was a fast way to make cash, and an even faster way to end up dead. Suddenly, Thomas's accident didn't seem so mysterious. A deal gone wrong, a partner getting greedy, or maybe Thomas had wanted out. The night before he died, Cora said, her voice hollow as she stared at the ledger, at the proof of her husband's betrayal. We had a fight, the worst fight of our marriage. He came home late, smelling of cheap whiskey. He said everything was going to be all right. He said he had one last meeting, and then we'd be free of it all. He told me he'd made a mistake, that he'd gotten in too deep, but he was going to fix it. Her eyes filled with tears, but they didn't fall. I called him a fool. I told him he was going to lose everything we'd worked for. The next morning, they found him. Owen closed the ledger. The warmth had gone out of the room. The story had just changed again,